Welcome to Behold, a podcast about beholding Jesus and becoming like him. This week, Tyler Hardy talks with Chris and Samantha Surface on finding the will of God for our lives. Chris and Samantha share vulnerably about how they've sought the will of God in different seasons and share how seeking first the kingdom of God above all else has brought perspective and clarity.
Hey everybody, so glad you're joining with us for episode 2 of the Behold podcast. And today I've got my friends Chris and Samantha Surface, and they're here to talk with us a little bit about finding the will of God. And it can be kind of a big topic, but that's why we brought you guys in. We brought in the big dogs because they've had just an incredible journey walking with the Lord, and we're really excited to interview them and get to share them with you guys. So hopefully you'll enjoy. So Chris and Samantha, Samantha, start with you ladies first. Just kind of give our audience just a little kind of 2-minute overview of who is Samantha Surface, a little bit about kind of what you're doing in life, where you're from, some of those basics.
Okay, so I'm recently Samantha Surface, formerly Samantha Duffy, as of 5 months ago. Mm-hmm. So that's been fun, a new adjustment. And Chris and I got married in May. I've been coming to Antioch since 2012. During my freshman year, Antioch was one of the first churches I came to.
You're a veteran.
Chris beats me. And obviously you do too, Tyler. And then I'm in grad school right now. Mm-hmm. Did my undergrad here. Spent a little bit of time overseas with our church, and currently in my last year of graduate school.
Awesome. All right, Chris.
Yeah, so I was in A&M here in 2009, had just given my life to Jesus, and heard about this crazy church from Waco that was starting. So hopped in one of the services at the, Barbara Bush
right.
Bush Convention Center, and the rest is history. Yeah, it's about 12 years ago almost.
You hopped in early. You were
hopped in early, yeah. Hey, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I almost never came back. So
maybe we'll get into that later, guys. A little teaser there.
No, but yeah, pretty quickly just signed up and called this place family, and I've left as well overseas a few times, twice. But have always had College Station, Antioch as my home base. So
yeah, very cool, very cool. Okay, guys. Well, hey, let's just jump into the topic, and finding the will of God, that's a really big topic and probably elusive for many people. But I do think that people desire to, as they come into a relationship with Jesus, I think we all desire to kind of figure out, okay, God, what's next? What do you really have in store for my life? What are your real plans for me? And I think there's a genuine desire for people to not want to miss it, right? I think that when we talk about the will of God, we don't want to miss it. And so maybe, Chris, to start with you, just kind of, when you think about the concept, the idea, we want to hear some stories in a little bit, just kind of see your journey. But just when you think about the will of God, kind of how would you unpack that to someone who's just kind of asking about it for the first time? Kind of how would you kind of share that in like a general sense?
Yeah, well, thank you again for giving us such an easy topic. I think, over the years, the concept of what is God's will for my life has really changed. I would say that the main way it's changed is from being a place, a vocation, hey, what are you supposed to be doing versus what are you supposed to be? Who are you?
Right.
But yeah, I would say the will of God is what was God's intention for Chris when he created him. And yeah, it applies into my vocation, my work, my going and coming, my staying. But really, it's what was his intention for me, the heart, the new heart that he would give me, the life, the fruit of that life. And so that's kind of what it means to me and how it's evolved over the years.
Yeah. Samantha, anything you want to add to that? Just kind of, if you're trying to unpack it, I don't know, let's say you're talking to one of my kids. Samantha was a nanny for my kids at some point, which we're very appreciative of. In those formative years, preparing you to be an amazing mom one day. But let's say, I don't know, if you were talking to one of my kids and just, they're like, hey, how do you define, or how do you kind of unpack the idea of the will of God? How would you share that just kind of in layman's terms?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think for a long time the temptation is to make the will of God a very daunting, intimidating thing. And so I think I like what you said. How do you keep it really simple? Because it's true. It's like if we are supposed to interpret the things of God like children, then it really has to be simple. And I have a tendency not to make it simple, but I think I like to replace the will of God with the desire of God. So it's like, what is God's desire? Like, what is it for me? What is it in this moment, his desire? And I think it's just taking things from his perspective. So it's like, what would he want? Yes. And it takes away, I think, a bit of the like, what am I supposed to do in this like massive vision, and just to this simple day to day. And what would he do in this situation? What would my father do? Like, what would he want for me in this moment? And that's kind of what I think of when I think of the will of God's very.
I love how you're framing that with will of God or like the desire of God, because I think I'm reminded, just as you're sharing, reminded of, when Jesus said, I only do what I see my Father doing.
Yes.
Or I'm about my Father's business. Some of those statements from Jesus. And it's, okay, like he's trying to say to us that he's here on earth, the Son of God, to do something that's going to be pleasing, honoring to him, that's going to fulfill his desires. And so I guess when we get into the will of God, it really all of a sudden becomes a little bit more of, less about maybe my passions, less about, although we are passionate, we're gifted in things, but more about, wait a second, I want his passions. Like, I want his desires. I love how you frame that. Okay, so Samantha, let's go back to you. So kind of unpack a little bit just your story, your journey of, just kind of give us the shorter version of, hey, how did you come to know Christ? And then obviously I think anyone coming to know Jesus for the first time, then those questions come up at somewhere along the way. Maybe it's in our teenage years or whatever. We're saying, okay, well, I want to figure out who he really is, but then I also want to know what to do. So just maybe kind of as we talk about the will of God, the desires of God, kind of what was that maturing process like for you in those early days? We'll kind of get into it later.
Okay. Well, I guess I came to know Jesus when I was younger, and I look back on my childhood and I really just loved the person of Jesus, and I'm grateful for that. It doesn't mean though that I had to deal with all the junk, along the way, but specifically when I came to college was when I was very more radically impacted by the Word of God, and like, wow, we need to live this out more, than just being a kind of a Southern Christian. And something I just early on started feeling was this idea of like, if I just stay really close, and we say this a lot, but if I just can align myself with the church, I feel like I'll always be safe. And so like for instance, my freshman year, I was in like every organization you can think of. I mean, I was like in a sorority, I was in a leadership conference and a government organization. I mean, it was just insane. And then also trying to be a part of this church. And I remember at one point really wrestling with, which one do I want to pursue? Do I want to like go the full leadership route? And I think it's great. Like, we need people that love Jesus in all those environments. That's not this conversation, but like, which one do I really want to give myself to? And I just, every time I prayed about it, I just felt like the safer option, not safety and like what we think, but just if I want to maintain what I actually desire in God, I feel like it's to stay as close to the church as possible. So I just started doing that. And so the decisions I just started making were in line with God and the church being a part of it. And I still did things out like internships and things outside of just church activities, but I just tried to always make sure that I was a part of a body because it felt like it was going to help set me up to being on the right path.
Yes.
So for me, and I did that because I really legitimately had a huge fear of missing the will of God. For like, I would say most of my college years, and then like right after college, one of my greatest fears was just the fear of the unknown. Like, I'm just terrified I'm gonna miss it, or I do something and I look back and I'll have regret. And so it was something I thought about constantly. So that was kind of my response, was like, if I just stick with the church, like I won't regret, So that was a little bit of what my journey kind of looked like.
That's so interesting to think of. It kind of reminds me of if someone would say in a different way, but say, why do I want to be saved and I don't want to go to hell? It's like, okay, well, true, but actually there's actually more to it than it's not just a negative. It's, but I think we're all prone to that. We're prone to, I don't want to get in trouble. It's not out of a desire if I want to do right, is that I don't want to get into trouble, and I think that hearing you share that, it's probably so common for a lot of people of, of how many people have actually said, I don't want to miss it.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss the will of God. And they feel like there's these never-ending tipping points or crossroads they come to, like never-ending, and it's, I don't want to miss it here, I don't want to miss it here. And it almost can make us feel like we're never going to win. Or, well, maybe we got it right in this relationship, but maybe in the job we didn't. Or maybe making this move to the East Coast was right, but then maybe I missed it here. And it's this kind of questioning, I think, of, are we in the will of God? Was that the will of God? Well, if it wasn't, oh well, I can be forgiven, but move on. I mean, just this game. So, I don't know, Chris, I don't know if you've experienced on some level, but just, you mentioned that, hey, you really gave your life to Jesus in 2009, which is awesome. I love that. And you started following him. And so here you are as like a college student, different than Samantha's story, following Jesus and at the same time really wanting to like get it right. As much as I know you, it's like you're a man of excellence. But it's like I can perceive going back in time, you want to like get it right with God, whatever that is, and get in the Word and figure it out. So just how did you navigate some of those early questions you had about, well, what is my purpose? What's the will of God in my life? Like as you started searching the Scriptures really for the first time and going deep, kind of what are some of those questions you had and kind of how did you resolve some of those things?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, to me, very early on, not that it still doesn't to some extent, but the will of God felt very like substantial, like doing, acting, going. Yeah. And so I studied civil engineering in college and had just gotten saved. And all of a sudden I'm at this crisis of like, why am I even in school? Why am I even studying?
Which we've all had.
Like none of this matters, And so I graduate and I said, you know what? I'm just going to like put this on pause for a second. So I took that summer. Most of my friends had jobs lined up. I could have, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
And I spent the summer in northern Uganda. And Antioch at that time had an orphanage set up over there. So I just said, hey, I'm just going to show up and help.
Yep.
I showed up and helped. And that wasn't, let me say this, that wasn't like a super spiritual, like, thus says the Lord, go. It was just like, I just need to go figure some stuff out. So I just went for it. Coming back, unfortunately, that made my life even harder with like wrestling through what is God's will. Because I'd just been exposed to the like sad reality that there are people that have never heard about Jesus. Yeah. There is extreme poverty that I've never seen, but now I've seen it and I'm like not the same. So I came back and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just said, you know what? Kind of like Sam, maybe not as much fear at the time, but I'm just sticking with the church. So I stuck around here in College Station. I was, again, graduated with an engineering degree. I was working at a landscape company and just said, hey, I'm just going to stick it out here at the church. And what I would say happened over the next 4 years is like just the most unique orchestration of circumstances to, all of a sudden I'm in an engineering job here in College Station, which back in 2011, like you weren't getting an engineering job in College Station. No. Like it just wasn't happening. And it was like decision after decision where I just said, you know what, I'm just going to, follow God. And I'm not going to worry about the rest of this. Right. It was just like he showed up and I could go into stories about that. And so I would say early on, kind of what I found was I never got the thus says the Lord audible voice thing happening. I never really even had incredible like encounters with the Lord that just gave me physical direction. But as I just like said, you know what, I'm just going to follow him. I'm going to serve. Yeah. Like he just showed up from financial ways to opportunity ways. And to me, it was kind of like the living experience of seek first the kingdom of heaven and all these things will be added to you. Right. And it was like, I mean, if we're just talking about the will of God, one thing that I experienced on the financial front early on, man, I just was giving everything away. And it was like, I could not give it all away because it was like, I'd give it away and double would come back, Wow. And so I just like give it away again and like kind of like a snowball of like, come on, like what's going on? Like, I'm trying to like live simply, but I keep getting more. And so I just keep giving it away. And,
that's awesome.
Anyways, some cool stories with that. But yeah, so I would say early on, maybe to summarize this, is I just like walked. And I said, you know what, I'm going to walk alongside the church. Right. And God showed up. Yeah. And while those were tough years, a lot of wrestling, I would say they were foundational years for me. So, yeah.
Man, that's so good. And I love just even, I think we can over spiritualize a decision. You're like, I just went to Uganda.
Yeah, you're like, oh, just speak from
See
heaven.
to go figure it out.
Yeah, wouldn't that be easier?
Yeah, that's just a tip for our audience. If you tend to lean into, I've got to have it all figured out before I go, you'll probably still be waiting. Because life is set up in such a way, and even Jesus, I think, modeled for us, just life is on the go.
Yeah.
And things develop and happen not by sitting around waiting for them, just going after it. It's that idea to go make disciples. It's the idea to seek the Father, it's like there's this action-oriented nature in us that I think, to your point, we discover more about God and who we are by just going on the journey with Him, Okay, so you mentioned a little overseas experience. So Samantha, back to you. Just, you've had a bit as well. I would love just for you to share just a little bit about your experience in Europe that one summer during Engage the Crisis. I think was it 2016? Is that right? Of course, many of you guys know, but just again, we had this large refugee crisis thing happening across Europe, 2016, and I mean the world was kind of fixed on what is happening here, and we as a church pulled together with other Antioch churches and said, hey, let's send people and figure it out. We weren't really sure what we're doing, so you guys got sent to Belgium, which was quite interesting, although they've got great coffee and some great pastries and waffles in Belgium.
Yeah.
But you signed up for an adventure, and kind of like Chris, it's like he just went to Uganda, didn't really know what it was all about.
Yeah.
You signed up, but like, hey, I'm in, but not really sure what I'm getting myself into. So maybe just unpack a little bit of that summer in terms of, one, like, why did you go? Like, where? Like, what was your thought process in that? Because I think we talk about the will of God. It is part of our decision-making process.
Sure.
And so what were the things you thought through, prayed through, considered, and going, and then just maybe sharing a little bit about, okay, now you're there, and you're asking the question, man, am I like in the will of God? Or am I like actually doing what He wants me to do this summer? Because I'm sure there's some days you wake up and you're thinking, what are we doing? Like, was this a mistake? Other days you're like, we're on the glory cloud.
Totally.
Just maybe take us through that process, getting there, and then once you're there, just kind of some of the things that God was teaching you in that time.
Yeah. So, it is so funny because as Chris and I both said, although kind of differently motivated, this theme of like, we're going to just stick with the church. Like, this is God's church and the body, the bride. And it's so funny because it really is through that I now feel like I have a greater understanding of like, what has God put inside of me? It was from all these experiences. And I would say that's like, whether you're gonna be a missionary or most likely not, like that still comes out in these environments. It's crazy. And so 2016 was the end of my time in college. So every summer before that I'd been going on an Antioch mission trip. And so what would happen during those summers is I really would just feel alive. I mean, they were not all easy. I mean, our first one, we went to Mongolia, and I remember being like, Lord, if this is what your will is, like, I'll come back. But, it was so hard. It was like such a hard trip.
Yes.
And, but still, you look back and you can see God and like what He did. It's always easier to look back and be like, I can see what God was doing now that I'm removed.
Even though it was hard.
Even though it was hard.
Yeah.
And anyway, so all those years were incredibly formative to where when 2016 came, my heart was burning to be overseas. And what was going on with the refugee crisis was so elusive to us over here in the West. It was like, we don't really know what's going on, but it looks crazy. And we actually hadn't really experienced that, our generation yet, to that level. Granted, refugee crises have been happening forever.
Yes.
And so, we were pumped. I mean, Tyler, you gave us an incredible team, and so we were like excited and ready to go. But I remember feeling terrified. Like most people don't know this, but I like intentionally scheduled more time to pray that semester beforehand because I was like, this is terrifying. Like you watch the news, and granted, we were, we're not like pulling people off of boats. We're in Belgium, and so it was different. But it was just like I hardly know anything about Muslims at this point, and we're supposed to lead these teams, and so we get to Belgium, and the people that were on my team, they're all older than me. And so it was like, well, that was kind of, already uncomfortable.
Sure.
Who am I? And what are we, and the first few weeks we were in Belgium, we couldn't even find a refugee. I mean, it was like, here we come, we came to love you.
We're ready with all of our
it was like, where are they, And it was like, this is not what we were planning. So all of our training, so we're like just going out in Europe, doing cold evangelism to a people. It's not like College Station. Like if you want to learn how to share the gospel, Bryan College Station's ripe.
Amen.
It's like
Amen.
Anybody can respond well to that.
Yes.
But like in Europe, I mean, they just think you're crazy, So it was just like talking to somebody was very painful, Or you explain the gospel and they'd be like, I've never heard that, And so the first few weeks it was powerful. Finally, we get we really start working with refugees, and I mean, it was just it was an incredible experience, very difficult experience, emotional. Every day was different. And there was no handbook, so you go into these refugee centers and people, I would listen for hours, just sit in a room with women, listen to their stories, or not even listen. I can't speak with them. I don't have an interpreter. Right. So I'm just singing worship music. Smiling, playing Uno. I learned 1, 2, 3, 4 in Arabic, it's just be present.
Wow.
But we did see incredible testimonies of what God was doing that summer. Definitely not every day. There were weeks where we were like, okay, we are here, and you feel more inadequate than ever in an environment like that, because who are we?
Yes.
But
so let me ask you just on that real quick. So you're there, and you're there on mission. You've raised this money. You've given up your summer. We're like, here we go, and yet every day it's not what you expected. So where is that internal place that kept you centered and focused, even though outwardly or circumstantially you're like, this almost feels like we're not even doing anything. When you look at your circumstances, and yet where do you land and go back to? No, this is good. I'm able to get up and put yesterday behind me and try again today. What's that motivational piece when you feel like you took a big risk, and I believe this is what God's saying for me. I believe this is the next thing. This is right where He is, but I'm not necessarily experiencing that. You know what I'm saying? Because that's a hard thing for people. Where do you, what did you have to dig in and find? Even as a 22-year-old young lady right out of college, where did you go to so that you didn't just crumble? Or just quit, right?
Yes. Well, actually, something that I think about is just the value of mission. Something I miss even when we were doing our year in Indonesia and these other places. It's when you're on a team and you're actually outside of America, you have this mission. You're I came here to share the gospel. So it's this driving mission to see something. And it's something that actually I actively have to put on here in the United States, because it's not this is my home. So it's really quickly for me to kind of ignore mission, because I didn't really go anywhere. Does that make sense? Yep. And so in Belgium, it was well, we're here and we're going to love them. And sometimes that meant literally walking in the rain with an umbrella every day, just prayer walking. Yes. And I think, so one of them is just mission, and then the other would be just testimonies. You would hear something of what happened on another base. So that person started walking that was paralyzed, or that whole refugee family from Iran came to know Jesus. It was just those testimonies made it worth it. Yes. And the following summer, I was in Greece again working with refugees, and we heard the craziest stories about people coming to know Jesus. And the stories were always oh yeah, I was in a refugee camp and this woman gave me a Bible and I threw it at her. And then I went to another refugee camp and a woman in a bread line gave me something, and I spit on her, I told her I was a Muslim, And then the third time, Jesus encountered me. And it was stories wow. that I was we have to just be okay with being people that are willing to just sow seeds and be I don't need to see the fruit of it, because look what happened. So that second summer in Greece, I remember being what happened 12 months ago? That was not necessarily because of us, but what God was doing was so powerful, because people were being faithful just to be okay with sowing seeds. Yes. And so that's something I even try to remember today with it's not my right to see something, but if I can take joy with being
Yes.
faithful, then I'll
love
see
that.
my life will, bear witness to it. So
I love that. Hey, so that's a reminder for everybody. Someone throws a Bible at you, just know Jesus is going to get him. All right,
Yeah,
eventually.
he's coming.
He's coming. Okay, so Chris, and maybe just to key off of what Samantha was sharing, I think what's coming to mind was just this idea of perseverance with like the will of God. So it's like, hey, God, you called me into this, or you gave me this assignment. Okay, that sounds rosy.
Yeah.
Rubber meets the road. I've got to like overcome a bunch to stay engaged, right? So maybe to share a little bit with our audience, just your story of going to the Sudan. I think it's unique because you wanted to do something with your degree. As you mentioned, you had a degree in engineering. You were like, I want to help. I have a skill set. I have an engineering degree. How can I do that in this nation, in a place where desperately needs some help on the structural, practical side, but I also want to be engaged spiritually, and that's difficult. But just maybe unpack a little bit, just how did you go from Bryan College Station to the Sudan, engaging in a work there, trying to use your degree, and then also I know some of your story wasn't all roses. There were some dark days, but just so how did you persevere? And even though you maybe felt like crumbling at times, but you stayed in it because you knew God initiated something. He invited you into it, and you were convinced of that, and so you stayed with it. Just talk about that perseverance and kind of that journey.
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned earlier about my first experience in Africa, and that really just shook me up. And it really made me not okay with just the ordinary. And I'm thankful for that. So fast forward 4 years, I've been working at an engineering firm, great place, gave me awesome experience. But the whole time there's like, there's something here that is like drawing me. So I've been praying into that. I've been giving to Africa, to Antioch's orphanage. I'd been, with what I could here in the States, investing in that. And kind of small world. My college roommate, one of my closest friends, actually best man at my wedding, ended up in South Sudan about 2 years after we graduated. So he was over there, and I knew he was doing his thing. But they're just, he was with a different organization out of Houston. I just didn't really connect the dots. And so he sent me a job opportunity with his organization, and it was right exactly with what you're saying, Tyler. We need an engineer to come help us do some construction. And it sparked my interest. I was like, well, I don't know. This feels like what I've been praying for like the whole time. Well, as that evolved, they were like, yeah, well, actually, they were just figuring stuff out as well. They're like, okay, it's not a job. We just want you to volunteer. And
Catch.
That's not a big deal.
I was like, can you come? And I almost like completely wrote it off. And I won't get into the whole story, but I felt after I just sat down and I was praying about this thing in my heart. I'm like, God, you're calling me. And I had completely ignored this opportunity. And he was like, basically like, hey, I put that right in front of you. Go back and look at it.
Wow.
And so
just so you know, I worked through your buddy, through that company to get to you, and even to recognize, oh, wow.
I mean, it was
like
probably
God's working that way.
It was a couple months after I'd received that and had a preliminary conversation. I had just completely forgot about it. Wow. And so I'm still praying into it. I'm like, all right, God, you're calling me. Where are you sending me? Wrestling through this will of God thing on my life. And he's like, hey, buddy, like, I handed it to you.
Softball.
And you just like put it in your red folder of your inbox. Go back to it. So I went back to it and anyways, pursued it. That was tough, man. I showed up to rural South Sudan, one of the most undeveloped countries in the world. I spent 6 months out of the year alone in a village, no other Westerners, white people, definitely barely anyone that spoke English. And I want to mention something. It's kind of a small, like, hey, I'm with you, Chris. I talked about the financial thing earlier, but as an engineer, that was a single guy for 4 years, I should have had like plenty of money, but like it was just not what I chose to do. I chose to give. So I'm like getting ready to go, and I'm not broke, but like, I mean, my savings account's like,
you're close.
I'm close. And I had just given a pretty large sum of money away before I even like knew about this whole deal. And anyways, they said, hey, we're not going to pay you. It's going to be really hard. You're going to be alone out in the middle of Africa, but we'd really like you to come. Fortunately for them, you know, God was speaking to me. I felt like he was. And so that's what got me on board, not their, you know,
Not
Amazing
their
opportunity.
incentive package.
And I needed to raise a certain amount of money. Well, I felt, again, to add to the snowball, this like strong conviction, hey, if God's calling me to this, he's going to provide. So I chose not to raise support, ask for money. I made my needs known. I talked to whoever I could tell that I was going. Man, like twice what I needed came in from unsolicited requests for me to go. And almost to the dollar, it was double what I had given like just months prior. Like it was really interesting. It was kind of that, you know, reaping, like sow what you'll reap type thing. And I wasn't looking for that. It just, I was like, okay, I think God, that was like the nail in the coffin. Not that wasn't the best analogy. That was what just put me overboard and sent me. So I was like, okay, God's behind me. He paid for it. I can show up. Well, showing up and persevering are two different things, you know. And so I would say what kept me in there was just knowing that he was with me. I mean, there were days, man, that I literally was like, all right, I'm just going to like start walking to the Ugandan border 200 miles away and get out of here. You know, there was no way in or out except for a private plane. It was kind of in the middle of a civil war. I was eating rice and beans 2 meals a day, hard labor, working with the locals, trying to disciple men, and they barely spoke English, and I'm just like going crazy. I learned some good lessons. Don't go alone to the middle of nowhere. I would say that to a lot of young people.
In the middle of a civil war.
I would say go with family, go with people that are like-minded, like-hearted, that God's sending you with. But in the middle of that, I just learned that he was my provider. And so I never lacked anything. I never lacked food. Sometimes I thought I was going to. But what kept me in there was like the consistent, like him just showing up in situations that I'm like, okay, I could chalk that up to circumstance, but I know that my Father cares about me. And so it was like those moments, those him providing for me financially, him rallying people around me that I never thought could get behind this type of vision, that kept me there. And it's been a while, so I'm trying to reflect on like what kept me in those hard moments. But I would say it was just like I was rooted back on something bigger than myself, so that when it was not a fun experience, it was like, okay, it's not about me. God's here, he's with me, and so I can stay. And so
You were trapped.
yeah, I was also had no way out, so maybe
Well, you know, but I do think that, man, you know, sometimes you know, God puts us in positions that we can't just wiggle out of so easily, because he wants us to get it. He wants us to, I think human nature is to take shortcuts. You know, then we don't actually have to go through the process, right? We like to avoid pain. But man, there's a lot of learning behind the pain. And Americans, we don't want to hear that. We want to short circuit pain, we want to numb it, we want to medicate it. But there's something in the pain that teaches us something in that perseverance, in that staying there with God. And I love hearing your story again. And yeah, I think you totally persevered. And love what you said at the end, just you're relying upon something he had already spoken, something bigger than yourself. You hold on to that. Every day was difficult, but you held there. And I think that's really important for people to hear. Okay, I want to switch gears for a minute here. Okay, so now we're going to get into the romance. Okay, you guys ready?
Wow.
You guys know you're going to get this. Okay, so obviously, let's just be honest. The elephant in the room is for everybody watching. Is if you're married or not married, will of God comes up with marriage. It's like it's front and center. It's just flashing red lights. It's like, job, we're going to live, but really, it's like, who am I going to marry? And because if I botch that one, There's a life of pain, okay? So none of us want to do that, especially you start following Jesus. You're like, oh, this is a great relationship, but then you forget he's perfect, I'm not. So it really is only one person has to correct things, Relationships now, I've got to choose somebody that's imperfect, but I like them. There's a lot of things I like about them. But God, is this your will? Yep. And, and I think some pastor years ago said some sort of phrase. They said, people wonder, like after they get married, oh, was this the will of God? And they'll say, well, whether is or isn't, you're already married, so it is now. So I don't know if that adage works, but I think for you guys, just love to hear either one of you can share. Just hey, a little bit of the whatever you're willing to share, a little insider information on how did you guys come to the place, and either one of you saying, this is it. Because I know the journey, it wasn't like, hey, we met each other in high school, went to prom, and then we knew that was it. Okay, so it's a bit of a journey.
It was a perseverance story.
So wounding up the...
Well, I think this is great. We didn't know you were going to ask about this.
Of course you didn't, because, hey, here we go. We're trying to be real.
This is great, because we have really two ends of the spectrum on how we felt like the Lord led us. Our relationship was long, well, to us, felt long, rocky. A lot of just, all right, I'm going to persevere. We're going to persevere. We're going to stick in this. I would say, I had the experience of living alone in Africa by myself. And so while I'm there reading my Bible and seeing things like he who finds a wife finds a good thing, I'm like, okay, that's the will of God in my life. Like there's just no question anymore. You know, if I thought I was an Apostle Paul, I wasn't. Like I'm finding a wife. And I'm not, I don't even care. I'm going to go find her. Yeah. And so I came back to the States on a mission, probably, honestly. But when I met Sam, and mine's simple, I'll let Sam share her side of the story because it's amazing. But mine was, I met Sam. I actually met her as I was coming back through South Sudan. We met in Brussels. I bought her a waffle.
Okay, that's a little pro tip out there. Traveling through, buy her waffle.
But we didn't start dating till about 2 years after that. And I met Sam. We went on a handful of dates. We were friends. I didn't meet her, and then we went on dates. We were friends for about a year. Yep. We went on about 3 dates, and then she left and went overseas. And on those 3 or 4 dates, I mean, time. It's, a year, a day. Yeah. 1,000 years are one day to the Lord. So
that's right. That's right.
After just a handful of dates, I was like, all right, Sam's beautiful. I have a blast with her, and she would live on mission with me. I'm in. I mean, it was like 3 dates, and I was done. I was like, all right, I'm marrying her. It's not that the feelings were quite there yet.
He didn't communicate that to me.
It's not that.
He didn't let you know.
Yeah, he didn't tell me that.
No. He had his journal.
That's wisdom. Don't share that. Hold on to that for a while. But yeah, I mean, I was just like, okay, I'm going to marry her. Great. And so then entered the pursuit. Sam's side of the story was a little bit different, but I would say even more powerful. And so I'll let you.
I'm trying to think which part of it.
Just like how God told you.
The
will of God. I mean,
really, how did you look at this man? He knew it was the will of God for him to find a wife.
Yeah.
He found you, bought a waffle. Next thing you know, he's in. Yep. And so for you, though, another journey is a little different. So just as a woman, certainly speaking to people, like that's a big deal when a guy pursues you and you're trying to respond. Is this the will of God? This guy's dating me? Is this guy just like me? Am I going to make a mistake here? It's very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yep. So just kind of what are parts of those story to help people hear, hey, here's the process I went on to getting to the place where I was more certain.
Yeah.
It's never going to be the writing on the wall, but it's like I'm as certain as I can be that this is right. This is the right guy for me, and this is the marriage for me.
Yeah.
How'd you get there?
Well, first of all, I just want to kind of say this on the front end, but I was the same as every other girl. It's like, when's it going to happen? Who's it going to be? Sure. And there's no way they're around me. It's like, it's just like how everyone feels, But I was very determined not to wait around. I was like, I'm not just going to hang around and wait until he comes because God hadn't told me to wait. And so I just like was like, I'm going to go live my life. And so I was like on my way to Indonesia. And it sounds so dramatic now that I look back on it, but I was like, I'm going to live and die in Indonesia, single. Like I was pretty sure if I went to Indonesia, I was going to fall in love with it and I would stay. And I think if I hadn't met Chris, I probably would have, knowing my personality and just how much I loved it. Anyway. And so I was grateful for that like Chris wasn't going to stop me from wanting to go after that. Anyway, but he made it, a little bit harder. And so Chris and I, started going on dates and, again, I like this weaving of fear, but I think it's really relevant more than ever in this time we're living in, with just fear being everywhere. And I had always known my parents are divorced, and I had seen lots of people's marriages, whether they're young or old. Marriage isn't easy. And just like what you said, we want to run away from pain. So it's easy to look at marriage and be like, I don't want that. All I have is me and myself, and I'm good at taking care of myself. And I can run after God as hard as I want by myself. I don't have to drag anyone with me or be pulled. Anyway. And so I met Chris, and I had always been very impressed with Chris. And he asked me out, and I took some serious time to pray about it because I was going to Indonesia. And I was like, I'm just not sure about this. And I really felt like I need to go on dates with him. And, everybody else was like, you have to, just like, godly community's like, why would you not, Anyway. And so we did, and then I left 6 weeks later and was gone. And I just didn't know, Anyway, fast forward, Chris comes to Indonesia, and eventually we come back and we're still dating. And we get to the point where we're trying to decide, like, it's been enough time, like, are we going to get married? And I just was like, I just don't know. And always wrestling with, I just remember nights being like, Lord, like, you just have to speak to me. And I just felt so really lost. It was really, and I look back now and I'm like, it was so obvious, but we really do, God has to take us through a process. And it's often not clean because of whatever we've been through or whatever we choose to step into. And so I actually ended up breaking up with Chris out of just like, the dark days.
The Lord spoke to him, and she's dashing in the
I know. I broke up with Chris because I was like, I really just don't know if I want to marry him. And it's not fair to keep, the whole, not fair to you, And so broke up with Chris, and that summer went back to Indonesia. Anyway, fast forward, had come back. Chris reinitiated with me, and I was like, no, we're not. My mind hasn't changed. And so then the next 3 days, though, I just encountered God. And really, I won't go into details, but just really powerfully to where I could identify, like, God is in this, And he just spoke very simply, but in my heart, I knew that I, needed to marry Chris. And it's like, wow, what a transformation from being, so lost. But it really is true, you just sometimes just need a little word. And I think I knew all along I wanted to marry Chris. And people, Ash, your wife, my friends, they would be like, we all probably knew it all along. It was just you had to get there, And I reinitiated with Chris, and it was in that I was like, I'm positive. And really, it was mainly just because I just saw God in him. And he was like, there was nothing about Chris really that was a red flag outside of my feelings. I made so many judgments on our relationship based on my feelings. This day I'm feeling this way I'm feeling this, and I would use that to judge Chris and my feelings towards him, and if that was God's will. And so I've just become this huge proponent of whoa, what? We just can't make these decisions. We were making a joke about this earlier about feelings. And
just to clarify a few things, or hit on a few points that really has been a testimony to me, observing Samantha was, one, she's wrestling, trying to figure out the will of God, and in the way that most people want. They want that audible voice, although it wasn't quite that. It was like in a moment, God spoke, and I'm not kidding, audience. Samantha did a 180. It was like, I'm not sure to I'm completely sure. And it was like, okay, God, could you have done that a year and a half ago? That would have been awesome.
That time, God.
But also some other things that were big takeaways for me from us dating were, like she said, she didn't sit around and wait, and I didn't either. I was 31 when we got married, and I didn't spend that 10 years from out of college to 31 just sitting around moping about being single. Actually had a lot of fun, did a lot of crazy things, went to the places I couldn't go as a married man, or I could go but it'd be harder to go to. I served, I just was invested in the church, and so I would say to the young people that are just like feeling like I'm 22 and I just can't even live if I'm 23 and not married. I'd say you can, and go for it until that happens.
Yeah.
But also with that, we talk about the will of God, these lofty things. You know, we just had an awesome testimony of how God spoke, changed our heart, even towards me, which like, oh, thank you, Lord. But Thessalonians, I don't remember exactly where, but it says, this is the will of God for your life, your sanctification, that each of you should abstain from sexual immorality and know how to control his body in holiness. And it's like, okay, we didn't know if we were going to get married, but we knew the will of God in our lives was to walk purely. And so that was a priority, right?
Yes, right.
And so I'd say, like, even as you're searching out the will of God, like, it's like we so often focus on who am I married, what am I going to do? But like in the process, like, okay, he made it really clear, be pure, you know, walk holy just as he walked. And so like in the things we didn't know, we trusted him, but the things we did know, we committed to, you know, we're like, all right, we're going to commit to that because we know it's his will for us to walk purely, you know? And I think that just adds, that just like, you want to know the will of God, start there, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, the lofty stuff will come.
It all kind of falls. I mean, I agree. I mean, even as we were thinking about this talk, I was like, I think really, like, we have to get our minds off of this grand vision, like, who am I going to marry and when, and just focus on, like, what did he say? What are you, and just keep moving. You know, if we just like stop and are stuck because we're so unsure what God's saying, we'll never go anywhere. And I have found that I actually feel like I've found myself to be content with being like, I'm today in the will of God and satisfied with that because I'm just living the day to day. It's like I've just fallen into the right place. So like going on these Antioch mission trips, I like all of a sudden, even in Indonesia, was in all these humanitarian situations. Now I'm studying development because it kind of started, I think that's something I'd want to do and I want to see the church respond to. And it came from just following behind Jesus, you know, and not making it about my calling. You know, that's like a really big temptation. Like, God, but like, who are you calling me to marry so we can like do our thing with? And I think we just get lost in those things and it becomes more about me, you know, and wanting it to be significant or wanting it to be the right person that fits this mold. And I think that's often where I get off.
That's so good. Even as you guys are sharing, I just had this thought that, you know, it sounds like even in both your stories, even Samantha, you talking about Chris and doing the 180, it's like if we talk about the will of God, oftentimes we are the main reason that we're hindering it, right? It's not that God's will is off. It's actually our emotions, our pain, our fears are actually hindering us from engaging with it. So even back to your point of be holy as I am holy. You know, it's like refrain from sexual immorality, like walk in purity and holiness. Jesus saying, I only do what I see the Father doing. Like, so maybe we coming back to this idea of the will of God is simply it is to know him, to be like him, and also to remove things in us that are hindering us from engaging in the very thing that he's put us in, or from even looking at our current circumstance and saying, well, this must not be the will of God because it's hard, or because whatever, and actually saying, no, this is the will of God.
Yeah.
I'm in southern Sudan by myself eating rice and beans, and this is the will of God for my life right here and right now. That will change one day, you know, but today this is what I'm doing. And I think maybe part of the thing as we kind of wrap it up here is just, I love hearing y'all's story because it sounds like y'all have gone on the journey and I think come to this place in your maturity with God and discovery of like the will of God is whatever I'm doing today, I'm going to give my whole heart to it. I'm going to try to honor him with my life and tomorrow will be a new day. But I don't, and acknowledging I don't want to get in the way of what he's trying to do. And meaning he wants us to be part of the story. But if we've just got fears or pain or stuff, wrongful thinking, it's hindering us from experiencing that. Or
walking on obedience.
Yeah, or it's like, okay, maybe you never married Chris because you couldn't get out of your own way. Right? And really he's like, I'm trying to get you to have a radical heart transformation to see what I've been saying all along and all your friends are saying. You know? So I love that it can be simplified into that of you're just trying to get to know him, honor him, but then also being okay with, hey, maybe it's not just the circumstances that are hindering my ability to engage with God. Maybe it's here. And I think to your point, we have a big challenge in our society right now of being able to point the finger at ourselves. Right? It's this guy didn't hire me, so it's their fault. Or I didn't get into that school, the admissions. Or I asked her on a date, she said no. Well, they're all wrong. It's like, well, hold on, maybe there's something here that God's trying to get to so I can experience that fullness. So anyways, I love that you guys are sharing. Maybe just to wrap it up, any final thoughts, anything you want to share just on this topic, anything that's just on your heart to share?
Yeah, I would just affirm that. I'm just thinking about my own experience. And so while my experience doesn't define truth, I would say that I can see God's hand in some of my experiences. So graduating college, great GPA, good experience, chose to stay in College Station. Looks like things aren't working out. I'm working at a landscaping company mowing grass. And, you could say, I guess I'm not in the will of God. This isn't working out. It's like, no, at that time, and I would say even now, the priority was his church. And so it didn't look like what everyone else thought it should look like. Right. But he showed up in South Sudan. I mean, gunfire is going off because we're in a civil war. You could say, maybe this isn't where you're supposed to be. But he had several times along the way just shown me this is where I'm taking you. And so you could take that as, okay, I'm out of here now. Not advocating to put yourself in danger. I'm just saying that there actually most of the time, the situations I'm in pursuing Samantha, I mean, geez, a year of I'm not sure how I feel about you, Chris. I could have easily taken that of, okay, maybe I just missed
I'm
it.
Out of here. Sure. I'm out of here.
But I think the times that I've seen God show up the most where there's a couple things involved. One, faith. I just felt like he said something. And so I'm I'm going for it. Right. But almost always accompanied things not working out very well. And it almost always accompanied then something crazy happening and it working out great, Yeah. And so, I would just affirm that being in the will of God, don't look for human results. Yeah. At least in the way that be open to him showing up in his timing, in his way. And just walk in faith. So
and certainly don't compare your life to someone else's, because Sudan for you is San Francisco for another.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they can both be in the will of God, but it looks very different. I love that. Samantha, what do you want to say?
I was going to say the same. One of that, just be really careful where we're actually feeling like we're getting our motivation to go a certain direction from. Is it really? I find myself sometimes wanting to do something. I'm a big dreamer, and I'll be actually, this is all about me. It's like taking a holy bent.
Sure.
But it's really not about God.
Yes.
And there's this analogy I really like as somebody who really does decision making, thinks about it a lot, every decision. That somebody told me once recently, and it's from an author named Dallas Willard, and he has this analogy of kids playing on a playground. They're if your kids are playing on a playground, you would never expect them every 5 seconds to come up, Evelyn to come up and be like, what should I play next, Dad?
Right.
Or should I go on the swing every 5 seconds? You're just go play. If we're about to jump off, I'll intervene. And if we need to move to the next playground, I'll come and get you.
Right.
And I like that analogy because I feel like that is a really good, helpful analogy of how do we live our life with God. It's we have the Bible. We do what it says on the playground. We're helping the kid that falls. We're asking them about how they're doing, and we're playing, and we're doing life.
Yes.
And if I'm about to hurt myself, God is sovereign. And since my eyes are always on my dad that's over in the chair, I'll be fine. And if we need to move and I need to go into the next location, he'll move me. That's and so that has helped me just to get my eyes back down to the day-to-day and being I'm just walking day-to-day, humbly and faithfully as best as I can, and it's enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, guys, thank you all for being here. It's been awesome. I got to learn some new things about you guys today. And hopefully everyone tuning in, thanks for just being a part of this episode on the will of God. Hopefully you took something away from it. But I just want to pray just to end our time just to pray that really that God would be speaking to you, that you would seek him out in your life and the word, and that things would be clear. So Jesus, we just ask that you would, for everyone listening, Lord, that you would resettle them again and understanding that the will for their lives, that it can look different than their neighbors and their siblings and their friends, but that God, but they be reminded that there is a purpose and a destiny put on every single person, and that may change and ebb and flow through time, different circumstances, but ultimately your desire is to draw us near to you so that we can behold you, so that we can look upwards towards you and say, God, what do you want with my life? You're the one who made me. I just want to follow you. So Lord, I pray for every person watching, stir their hearts, affirm them wherever they're at, encourage them, God. We do pray for the perseverance to come upon them, that they would have the strength and the courage to stay in it, whatever they're doing, even if it's hard, and to trust you through and through. Lord, we thank you and we love you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks again, guys. We hope to see you next time.